Hey everyone, Chapter 8, here we go. Turfgrass Pest Management, Chapter 8, Animal Pests of Turfgrass, Insects, and Vertebrates. So I apologize for the long delay on this. If you didn't realize that, because you just found this channel, there's about a month delay from Chapter 7 to Chapter 8. 3 weeks, I guess. I had a surgery operation, and then my family, we had a sickness go through, so it wasn't working out. But I finally got it. I'm going to wrap up the turfgrass section. We'll dive in to other categories later this fall. Basically, this summer, I'm going to mainly talk about application methods and products. That's kind of the where this channel is going to go for the summer. And then we'll dive back into the actual education for pesticide applicators later this year. So without further ado, let's dive in. We got Turfgrass Pest Management, Chapter 8, Animal Pests of Turfgrass, Insects, and Vertebrae. Okay, so what are the objectives of this chapter? It's to describe the insect pest relevant to turfgrass here in Michigan. Also, if you guys are watching this and you're in other states, this can apply to you still, but again, we're following our turfgrass manual here in Michigan. So if you're in the southern states, there's probably going to be some things that don't apply to you, or you might have other insects that you got to deal with, other pests. But for the most part, we're going to be following the Michigan one, which is pretty valid for most of the Midwest, I should say, maybe even some of the East Coast. So yeah, we want to recognize the damage that these symptoms, of the symptoms that are caused by these insect pests or vertebrate pests. You want to be able to explain when during the year various insect pests would be actively feeding. A little teaser there, they're pretty much going to be feeding around the same time of year, because that's when insects become active. Explain the various management methods for insect pests. And basically, when we manage insects, we want to manage them to or below an acceptable level. We also want to be able to list the common vertebrate pests responsible for damage here in Michigan. Again, applies to a lot of states. Describe control methods. And then we also want to describe methods for minimizing mold damage to turfgrass. So let's dive in. Okay, so what are insect pests, right? Insects are going to be the little creepy crawlies that we have out there. They could be grubs, they could be ants, they could be Hchinch bugs. They could be. There's a lot of different insects out there, but most insects are actually beneficial to turf. Even some that might be classified as a pest can be considered beneficial. So, and a good comparison would be the blue-eyed bug. Looks very similar to a Hchinch bug, a Hchinch bug. And, you could be misidentifying it. You could be killing beneficial insects right in the turf. So we want to accurately identify what is the pest, what is actually going on. You need to know the life stages, right? You need to know the eggs, the larva, the pupa, the immature stage, the mature adult stages. So that way you can determine what you're dealing with. As pesticide applicators, it's not just, identify one stage and then apply one product. It's not a one-size-fits-all model. You have to be able to adapt and change to what you need to do out there in the field based on what you're seeing, right? So insects can be grouped into really two main categories. You're going to have your insects that feed on roots, the foliage, and the stems, and then you're just going to have some nuisance pests. Nuisance could mean you got some ants that are building up mounds. Right? That's a nuisance. If you want good quality turf, but you got ant mounds, well, those ant mounds are unsightly. So it's just a nuisance. But those ants are probably actually beneficial because they're killing other insect pests and they're cleaning up the turf in a weird way. So let's dive in. So here's some common insect pests that we have here. We got a Japanese beetle and a European chaffer bug side by side on each other. So you can see the differences. Japanese beetles are very easily identified. They got that green hue on them. They generally, once they're adults, like that stage right there, they take over various plants. We also have a May-June beetle, or June bug is what we call them here in Michigan. And I didn't put that on here because those are pretty common knowledge that you know what they look like. They look really similar to a European chaffer, but they're not. And then we have the black turfgrass Atanius and Aphodius. And those two black beetles down there are those two side by side. They look very, very, very similar. The main difference that I see on these are the legs. The legs look a little bit different. The Aphodius, it looks like it has a little bit more of a hairy leg compared to the black turfgrass Atanius. So proper identification is going to really tell you a lot. Okay, so let's talk about that black turfgrass Hchinch and Aphodius beetles. The larvae are going to feed on the turf roots in July and August. Golf course fairways are going to be their main areas where they're going to show damage, right? They're going to have brown patches where there's a heavy infestation occurring. But damage is really uncommon in residential turf. So you probably don't need to worry about this if you're running a typical residential turf program. They're really small. They could be 1/4 of an inch in length. So very, very tiny, right? 1/4 of an inch, tiny, tiny little beetles. Both species are almost identical, which we kind of just saw in that picture. And they're also identical in their appearance, but also their damage. So you could misidentify those, but you're going to be in the same realm of like, hey, it's one of these two. Golf courses will sometimes have damage from one or both species simultaneously. So, it's not always a guarantee that they're going to be together, but if you have stressed turf, it's highly likely that you're going to have more than one pest. So let's talk about the action threshold and management of these two beetles. The Hchinch, if you're finding more than 80 larvae per square foot, that's pretty much what's going to be required to injure turf. But the Aphodius beetles, all you need is 60 per square foot. So, you got like a 25% difference. The Aphodius are a little bit more damaging at a lower population level. But again, this is mainly going to be a problem on a golf course. You're not going to have too much of an issue on residential turf grass. The main reason for that is because we have a lot of natural enemies that are handling these beetles in residential turf grass. We're also not mowing as low as what a golf course does. But these beetles, they're going to overwinter in woodlots. And you'll find the largest numbers of these beetles in the turf in between 7 and 9 p.m. And that'll be your first indication if you have a problem. You go out around 7 to 9 and you look at the turf and you see how many are there. And that'll tell you if you have a real problem. But injury is really not noticed until early June and July. There's a really high action threshold. So you don't, if we're having 80 to 60 larvae per square foot, it requires a substantial population before you even want to take, any management, really. Preventative insecticides in May to kill the adults prior to egg laying. So that's one way that you can control the population. And then spot spraying when needed after the initial preventative treatment sometime in June and July. So if you're seeing these, you can do a little spot treatment. Various insecticides can be used on these. You just got to basically find what beetles, what are out there. I know a really common grub application would be imidacloprid. Not the best product, but you could also use a celloprine. Awesome product. Celloprine is very, very expensive. The reason it's so expensive is because it doesn't harm pollinators. Whereas imidacloprid, if you throw that down in a lawn and it's on something that's flowering, it's going to be devastating to pollinators. So, good thing to know. All right, so let's talk about the European chaffer. In the larval stage, it's a white grub. It's going to feed on the roots in April, September. April, it takes a break in the summer because it's becoming an adult. And then September to November, it picks back up in the larval stage and it starts to chew on it. And again, this is the cycle, right? So you have larvas that are eating in April. They turn into adults. They fly out. And then those adults lay eggs. And then September, November timeframe, those eggs hatch. They become larvae and they start to feed on the roots. Brown patches may occur if you do not water frequently. So on unirrigated turf, these things are going to show significant damage. And it is a pest of non-irrigated turf. If you have irrigated turf, you're going to be relatively okay. They look like a C shape. They're white. They're a 1/2 inch to 1 inch long by late September. Light brown, a real stout body. They have what's considered a clubbed antenna that's about a 1/2 inch long. They also make really good fishing bait too, if you can find these. The action threshold or management, if there's 5 grubs per square foot, that's enough for damage. So now if you tear up a piece of sod, you look at it and you find 5 in a square foot, okay, now you need to take some action. They come out and emerge in late July, June, similar to a Japanese beetle. They're most active in the dark. Management strategies are similar to Japanese beetles, which we're going to get into after this one. They're difficult to control with insecticides, so that's a note. But frequent irrigation in late June, July, August protects turf from the adults laying eggs, kills grubs, and relieves stress. It also allows roots to regrow. So why would irrigation play such a significant role in this? If you have a regularly irrigated turf, you can essentially suffocate these grubs by eliminating the oxygen within the soil that they need to survive. You're also going to relieve, like I said, the stress of that turf that roots have been chewed on. You're going to provide water for what roots it does have left and allow it to grow new roots. So this is pretty critical. If you're having an issue with European chaffers, irrigation is definitely your friend. So let's talk about Japanese beetles, these guys. This is the adult form that we're seeing here. And this is pretty typical here in Michigan, what we're going to see if you have a large Japanese beetle population. They all congregate on plants and they just start taking over. I find these on my property, on my raspberries, all the time. So yeah, but they are a larva. They do have a larva stage. They're white grubs, very similar to what we just saw. The turf was going to end up wilting and turn brown. And again, those are if the turf is not frequently watered. They're typically evident in the fall when weather becomes really dry. You're going to see turf start to struggle as it dries out. It's not going to have as much roots, and so you'll see these patches where it dries out significantly. This one prefers irrigated and moist soils in turf. So this is kind of the change up between the chaffer and the Japanese beetle. The chaffer prefers non-irrigated turf, and this prefers irrigated turf. So if you have drier soils, it's going to be, not necessarily the environment that they like. Their appearance, they're white. They're a C-shaped larva grub. They could be 3/4 of an inch to an inch long by late September. And then when they become adults, they turn into this dark metallic green, stout-bodied insect. They're pretty wicked. You can see it's defoliating that leaf very, very fast. So they can be destructive. So what is the action threshold in management for Japanese beetles? If you have 10 to 20 grubs per square foot that is irrigated daily, or 5 grubs per square foot on non-irrigated turf. So we have different variances based on if the turf is irrigated or not. These are going to emerge in late July to early August and feed on the foliage. They're going to begin mating and depositing eggs in July-August timeframe. April and May, grubs are going to move closer to the soil surface. The damage is going to peak in September and October when feeding and root injury peaks. Skunks and raccoons are going to cause damage because they're going to be searching for the grubs. And then if you can find 10 grubs per square foot in September, you can apply a curative insecticide treatment, and it's usually going to reduce the population by about 50 to 80%. Pretty significant, okay? So again, that'd be a broadcast application of the turf to wipe them out. If you can get 50% reduction, that's pretty significant. If you can go from 10 grubs a square foot down to 5, you've reduced it very, very heavily. There's also beetle traps, which I know for a fact those work phenomenally. And you want to place those away from any sort of landscape foliage or landscape beds that you don't want damage in, because those traps have a pheromone that's going to attract them to it. So you don't want to put that around anything that's desirable. You want to put it far away. So the beetles go there, they get in this trap, and then you collect them and they die. There's also nematodes, which I put a little asterisk next to it. Nematodes have a very similar damage look to this, but nematodes are extremely rare here in Michigan. Very seldomly are you going to find a nematode issue. If anything, a golf course might find it. There is a bacteria, a fungi, it's called HP-88 that has been proven to work on nematodes. But that's really the only battle that we have, or the only product that we have that has been known to work against nematodes that are damaging turf. And there's thousands, tens of thousands of nematodes out there, and very, very few of them are actually going to damage the turf. But the other big aspect with nematodes is you don't want to let the soil dry out. And you don't want to do really like a fumigation into the ground. It's not very effective, and it's also a lot more dangerous to the applicators. The May-June beetle, I think everyone's seen these. I didn't put a picture on this one. They're going to feed on turf roots from May to October when they're in their larval stage. creates brown patches in the turf. The vertebrate animals look for these beetles in the turf, larvae mainly, as a food source. They're a C-shaped white grub, just like all these other grubs. They're all C-shaped. They're all white. They could be anywhere from 1/4 of an inch to 2 inches in size. So these ones are a little bit bigger. Again, really good fishing bait. The action threshold and management, June beetle grubs are larger than Japanese beetles, but they have a lower threshold. You can find these on non-irrigated turf. They're very rare to find on an irrigated turf. So now we have Japanese beetles and June beetles that you can find on irrigated turf, and then the European chaffer beetle is something that prefers non-irrigated turf. So that's a good discernment if you look at the surroundings, what's going on at the residential properties. If it's a heavily irrigated turf, now you can eliminate the European chaffer and you can gravitate towards these grubs that are causing damage. I'm sorry, non-irrigated turf. So these ones and the chaffer are similar in that they don't like irrigated turf. I said that wrong. I'm sorry. And then the Japanese beetle prefers irrigated turf. So, but the adults emerge in April to June. The larvae live in the soil for 2 to 3 years. That's a long time. And majority of the damage is going to be caused in between May and September. So let's talk about sap, stem, and leaf feeders. Basically, these can be broken down into a couple of parts. One, insects with piercing, sucking mouth parts. They're going to insert this mouth part into a leaf. They're going to suck juices, which is sucking the vigor right out of that plant. Or you could have insects that are chewing and consuming tissues or cutting off shoots, damaging crowns, things like that. All right, so one of the first things that we're going to talk about is the black cutworm. That's what they look like right here. Looks like a caterpillar because it is a caterpillar, but they're referred to as a black cutworm. The damage that these things can cause is mainly going to be found on golf courses. You'll have small holes, 25, 1/4 of an inch on golf tees or greens with closely clipped grasses that spread outwards, maybe 1 inch from the hole. The appearance, these are like a dark brown caterpillar. They can be anywhere from 1/4 inch to 2 inches long. And the action threshold to management is really going to depend on the golf course superintendent and the golfers. If the golfers really don't care and the superintendent really doesn't care, then you don't take any steps towards managing it. It's going to vary year to year. You might have a banner year of these that are causing more damage, and so you have to take the necessary steps to control them. On residential properties, again, it's not mainly an issue because we have natural enemies. Probably a lot of birds are going to come down into the turf and eat these. Various other things could eat them. They can be an issue, but again, that's mainly going to be for golf courses. If you have to take a management option, one awesome way to do it is using Bacillus thuringiensis, the variant Kerstaki, also known as BT. That is a fantastic bacteria that affects caterpillars and really doesn't damage anything else other than caterpillars. So if you have these, fantastic product to use on them. And that's going to be for anything that's a caterpillar. We have the Bluegrass Billbug. That's what these guys look like. They're small. They have legless grubs that destroy crowns of plants. They create brown patches of turf in late July. As grubs, they're about 1/4 of an inch long, and then they develop into these. The action threshold to management, irrigated turf recovers pretty quickly, but less than 1/3 of the crowns can be destroyed. So if you have over 1/3 of the crowns destroyed, irrigation is not going to save you. It almost always is going to attack Kentucky bluegrass, so that kind of varies it down. It does attack perennial ryegrass, but not as prevalent as Kentucky bluegrass. It has a very similar look to necrotic ring spot. And insecticide applications are not fully warranted on these. And actually, they can make it even worse because you're going to be killing the natural enemies that are, can take care of these for the turf. Here we have the hairy Hchinch Bug. I forgot an H. Hchinch Bug. Little guy right there. He's on some turf, getting ready to munch on it. turns turf into some brown patches. They're large patches in early July or early August. And it looks very similar to a drought damage. So again, this is where, is it insects? Is it environmental? It really is difficult. And you have to analyze down in the turf and see what's going on. Adult chinch bugs are black. Their white wing marks are about 3/16 of an inch long, so less than 1/4 of an inch. The action threshold, you want to evaluate midday in early to mid-July, and you want to visually sample areas for 2 minutes. If 20 adults or larvae are found, that's when you need to take action. So it's really interesting to have this down to like almost an exact science of what time of day and when. Insecticide applications are acceptable when you exceed the threshold. So if you see over 20 adults within that 2 minutes of visual sampling of a turf, that's when you can apply insecticides and manage these guys. Here we have a sod webworm. That guy's huge. They create small brown patches. Basically, you're going to find grass blades that were clipped at the base. These patches can combine to be much larger, irregular shaped patches. They're a white caterpillar. I would say almost tannish brown, but they do have those little spots, which is a good indicator for them. They're anywhere from 0.25 to 1 inch in size. And the action threshold in management really depends on the importance of the use of the turf. Again, this is probably going to be more of an issue within a sod farm or within a golf course, not so much on a residential turf. Again, because we have natural enemies, they're going to take care of this. But the damage is going to appear in the springtime. Drenching turf with disclosing solution is going to bring these larvae to the surface. So if you don't know what a disclosing solution is, it's 2 tablespoons of water. 2 tablespoons of dish soap, like Dawn dish soap, mixed with a gallon of water. You pour that in an area, and then these guys will surface because it's an irritant to them. So that's one way to determine if you have these. The webworm damage mainly occurs in lawns that had pesticide applications performed that damaged beneficial insects and natural enemies. So we have to be really cautious with our pesticide applications because we could actually be causing secondary pests that are much worse than the original. Again, because they're a caterpillar, that Bacillus thuringiensis is a very good product to use if you have them. But as far as getting down into like the grubs underground, you're not going to be able to do that. You have to attack them in a caterpillar stage. So now we're going to talk about nuisance pests. Remember, we had some pests that actually feed and cause damage, and then we have pests that are just nuisance pests. I didn't put a picture of ants on here because I think everyone in the world has probably seen an ant. And their damage is mainly going to be due to mounds of soil, right? You're going to see those mounds build up in the turf, and it looks unsightly. Again, not as bad in a residential setting, but it can happen. Mainly, it's going to be an issue on golf courses. If you had ant mounds appearing in a golf putting green, that's going to cause an issue. Species dependent, they can be black, brown, red. They're generally anywhere from 1/16 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch long, depending on what ones you're dealing with. The action threshold in management, again, it's going to depend on the tolerance of the golf course superintendent or the golfers. Ants are beneficial. They do consume a broad range of food, including insect larvae and eggs. So by attacking them, you could be subjecting the turf and the other areas to additional damage from something else that they were already managing for you. So they are an ally for us. Insecticides generally are only going to provide 2 to 4 weeks of control, and that's because of how quickly they breed and reproduce. They have thousands of eggs underground, and as those eggs hatch, you have new ants, and it's a constant production of eggs and new ants. So it's very difficult. I will say that a really good product to use to fight ants is pyproxyfen. You'll find that in a product name called Teco Pro or Pivot 10. It's an insect growth regulator, and it basically stops it to where they can't reproduce. And I have seen fantastic results. I would say over 4 weeks. But again, here the manual says 2 to 4 weeks, even with the best insecticides. So that Teco Pro, the pyproxyfen, is actually an insect growth regulator, still classified as an insecticide, but it has a different mode of action than your typical broad spectrum insecticide. So for insect management, overall, what we want to do is we want to grow a healthy turf. In order to do that, we need proper irrigation, proper mowing, cultural practices. I mean, you guys know all that. We want to limit our pesticide applications because, as we've learned, it can cause more damage to the beneficial insect populations than actually controlling the pests. So we have to be conscious of that. We also want to use insecticides in a proper manner, right? We need to monitor. We need to apply when and where we need to. We have to protect beneficial insects. We have to get the right timing, because if you're going to do it at the wrong time, you just waste the application, you kill beneficial insects, and you didn't fix your issue. We also want to look at low toxicity insecticides, both for the applicator, the environment, and beneficial insects. And then we also want to record and evaluate, right? You need to know if your application worked. And so this is, again, it comes down to monitoring. You have to go back and monitor what you did, record and evaluate. Did it work? Did we have the right timing? Did we use the right product, et cetera? Are there other things that we could do to eliminate these? So we're going to talk about vertebrate pests. These ones, birds, skunks, possums, raccoons. Generally, they're going to be damaging turf when they're looking for food. They're going to be looking for grubs. Birds are going to go down looking for grubs. They're going to be looking for worms. They're going to be looking for caterpillars. Again, birds can be an ally, but if they start damaging the turf while they're looking for these things and cause more damage than they are doing good, then they become a pest. We also have moles. Moles are going to consume a large amount of grubs underground, but they create tunnels and upheave the soil and turf. So a good indicator that you have a lot of grubs is if you have a lot of mole tunnels. If you have a lot of mole tunnels, you probably got grubs. How do you get rid of the moles? You reduce the food sources, right? It just makes sense. You reduce the food sources and then you stop those animals looking there. They go somewhere else because they need to find food. So how are we going to manage vertebrate pests? Honestly, maybe no management's required. Maybe they're being more as a beneficial to you than not. There's a low tolerance. If you have a low tolerance of turf damage, then it might require management. You don't want mole tunnels on a putting green. Just makes sense, right? But again, you want to eliminate food sources. You want to use barriers, repellents. Trapping is an option. It requires labor and knowledge, and it also might require permits from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources and Environment. So we need to be aware of that. So let's talk about Canada geese. Canadian geese, Canada geese. They are a nuisance pest for sure. The main reason for that is because of their droppings on turf. If you've ever walked up to a beach that had a lot of geese on it before, you see the droppings everywhere. Probably not a good idea to walk into that water. You might get some swimmer's itch from some bacteria. But even just people's lawns, right? You got 40, 50 geese walking on that lawn. That's a lot of droppings. Also, because of those droppings, they're going to have runoff from that's going to increase nutrient loads, algal blooms, and fish kills. So it can cause a lot more damage to the environment by having a ton of geese walking around. The big thing that you want to do for managing geese would be stop feeding. You want to modify the site, maybe install some fences, some scare devices. Repellents work well. Dogs, chasing them off. Hunting can't always be done in every application if you're in the city, but it's definitely an option. And then another one that has been used, and I know this because my mom lives on a lake and they've been doing this program now for the last, I think, 5 years, is they catch and release at a different location. Why that's important is because geese will return to the area that they learned to fly. And if you can get the geese before they learn to fly, the new generation of geese, and you take them to, say, a state land property, lake, and they learn to fly there, that's where they're going to return. They're not going to come back to the lake where they were born. They return back to where they learn how to fly, which is pretty wild. But yeah, that's a way to manage them, and it works very well. I've seen it work well. I've seen the change on my mom's personal property at their lake, and it is an option. Now, as turf managers, are you really going to be out there trapping geese? No, probably not, but you might need to find some trappers that do that. So let's talk about mole management. I think this might be the last slide. Moles, as we talked about, they upheave the soil, they cause tunneling, they're looking for grubs, they're looking for food. The most effective way to control moles, besides eliminating the food source, is going to be traps. They're an extremely effective method for controlling moles. There's two different types of traps. There's harpoon traps and choker traps. And basically, you're going to identify where the tunnels are active. How you do that is you flatten the tunnels. You make a note of where you flatten the tunnels, and then you look for them when they're raised again, so you know that that tunnel is active. But trapping is by far more effective than poison baits or fumigants, and very, very effective. I've used them. They do work. But again, if you really want to control the moles, you want to control the food source. So if you have moles or your client has moles, you know that there's grubs underground. So if you eliminate the grubs, that mole is going to go somewhere else looking for food. He's going to go to the next door neighbors, and then they'll call you, and then you'll get more work. So that wraps up Turfgrass Pest Management. 8 chapters, lots of information, lots of detailed information in regards to certain pests. And yeah, that's pretty much going to do it. Overall, I hope this helps you. I hope it helps you pass the Turfgrass exam for category 3A here in Michigan. If you're in a different state and your category is different, turfgrass is turfgrass. General principles of turfgrass and turfgrass management are going to be the same. The pests might be different. The turfgrass varieties might be different, but the overarching premise is irrigation, proper cultural practices. That's going to be what we need to manage and maintain proper turfgrass. So that concludes Turfgrass Pest Management. Awesome. We're done. Now, if you've made it this far, the future of this channel for the next few months is going to be mainly about products and application methods. And we'll dive back into education this fall when I have time to do that and my season slows down, and we can actually help get more pesticide applicators in this industry. That's the goal, right? That's our mission, to help get people into this industry, make it easier, help you learn this material. So that way you can walk into the test, you can take the test, pass the test with flying colors, and get out there and start, producing and learning on the job. So without that, I thank you guys. I hope this helps you. I'm getting ready. You can see I got my mosquito backpack sprayer back there. We've been moving stuff around, moving some pool stuff around, getting ready. It's warm. Today's supposed to be about 70 degrees here in Michigan, so we're ready to rock and roll. So without further ado, take care, God bless, and go get them.